To all of those who have been struggling, to those who have lost their jobs and those who are barely hanging on, help is on the way and hope is on the horizon. That was a tweet today from Jason Kenney. And by Tuesday, we're going to see if that's true or not. And that's what we're going to talk about on our latest Alberta Reflection on Agree or Disagree, the podcast. Yes, folks, we are 2 days away from the Alberta election. Wednesday, April 17th, we are going to find out if the sun rises or is the destruction there, is the place, is Thanos done the snap? As Doctor Strange says,
we're in the endgame now.
Yes, it is the end game of the Alberta election. The election is on Tuesday. Welcome to Agree or Disagree, the podcast. My name is Kevin Olenek. You can follow me, as always, on Twitter at KEVOLE. You can find all podcasts on Spreaker or subscribe on wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, etc. You also can listen on Powercast 979 Wednesdays at 8, internet on Tuned In. And be a friend of me on Facebook, like Agree or Disagree, the podcast. And I'm joined, as always, by the wonderful people from the R&D podcast. Welcome, Deirdre. How are you?
I'm well, thanks, Kevin. How are you?
Great. Deirdre McLean. As all these background, watching our Google Hangout, she has all these signs of all of the people she's worked with, and I know every one of them. And I feel like we connected now in a different way. I don't see what's going on in the background of Robbie Kreger-Smith, but I'm sure that there are things wonderful going on there as well. And how are you in Edmonton?
Doing just fine today, thank you.
Thank you. As I was saying before we got on, as we were getting set up, it feels like there's nothing to talk about, but it feels like there's lots to talk about, if that makes any sense. Because it feels like I'm getting a sense that we are resigned to. Are we resigned to a certain result, I guess, in this election? Are we, as Tuesday is coming, are we preparing to expect for a UCP majority? Is that the feeling, or am I offside in thinking that?
I'm no longer resigned to that.
Yeah, I'm not either. I think that given the missteps that have happened recently in some of the recent polling, the trend is downwards for the UCP and is up for the Alberta Party and for the NDP. And usually those trend lines don't change going into vote day. And I've been hearing from a lot of people as they step into the voting booth that their initial inclination was UCP, but they just can't pull the trigger when push comes to shove.
So you're thinking that there's a possibility of something different?
Yeah, I'm thinking that UCP is still going to win, but I'm looking more towards probably a minority government.
That has kind of been my prediction, but I'm just, Deirdre, what are you feeling differently than Robbie on this?
I just feel like the trend going when the writ was dropped, I think the UCP had a higher level of support, and that level of support has just gone straight down. Now, I don't expect under any circumstances it'll be a wipeout, but where before the writ was dropped, I think a lot of people really thought that the UCP was just going to take everything, and that feeling is nowhere near as strong as it was, the first week of the writ drop. It's and I don't even know if I can say that there's a change in momentum, but I think absolutely the Alberta Party showing during the debate and with all of the things that are going on with the UCP, and there's really so many, that I think that, like Robbie said, people may have been thinking that they were going to vote UCP and made a last-minute decision not to. I also think as well, and again, this will entirely depend upon the turnout on Tuesday, but our advanced poll votes that came in were almost 700,000.
Yeah.
I mean, that's huge. Now, is that indicative of what's going to happen on Tuesday? Like that we'll just have so many more people showing up? I am very hopeful that it is. And that is something that is also making it hard for me to say that I think it's going to be what we all thought it was.
So I'm missing the tea leaves here, or in the feeling, and you guys are not. But it's good because I'm sitting here in BC, getting a sense of one thing, and you guys are there. So that's kind of a great perspective in that sense. So one of the things I did today was I asked on my Facebook and Twitter, I asked UCP supporters what the appeal of Jason Kenney was, and I asked this also on Twitter as well. What I found interesting is the amount of people that actually were like, this isn't about Jason Kenney as much as this is about the UCP party. And one of the questions that I think is going to be interesting going forward is around how well did Jason Kenney do as presenting himself as a legitimate leader for this party?
Well, it's an interesting question, but when you look at the strategy of the NDP and the UCP, it kind of answers that question for you. Because when you look at the election signage for the NDP, a vast majority of it doesn't even make reference to the NDP. It has Rachel Notley on it, and all of their online graphics are tied to Rachel Notley. And the reason for that is that her brand and her approval rating as an individual is outperforming that of the NDP. And the reverse is happening. And anecdotally, I actually heard at one of the candidate forums where a candidate did show up, they wouldn't even say Jason Kenney's name in the UCP. And so Jason Kenney's brand is not as strong. And in fact, his approval ratings are significantly lower than that of the party. And so people have a lot of heartburn and don't trust Kenney. And I've even heard don't like Kenney. But there's so much economic anxiety that they're hopeful that they can vote in the UCP and get rid of the leader after he's there, which is wishful thinking because I don't think he's going to let go of control easily. But one person said to me, we'll just do the same thing the PCs did to Redford and Stelmach. We'll give them the shove after we're in.
Interesting. That's interesting. Your thoughts, Deidre?
I totally agree with Robbie. Jason Kenney, as a person, as a leader, is not. That is definitely not what is bringing people to vote UCP. I have another theory, different than Robbie there, that I don't expect Jason Kenney to stick around if he does become premier. I don't expect him to make it through a full term. And not because they're going to push him out, which they might, but mostly because I expect that this was just to be used as a stepping stone for him to for him to try for the leadership of the CPC after Andrew Scheer loses the election in October.
Well, I'm actually with you on that because to me, I think there's some CPCers out there that are thinking if you're not going to win this election now, with all of the perceived scandal that Trudeau is under, if you can't win with Scheer, you got to go with somebody else. And I would think that Kenney is going to jump in and take a shot at that. I actually don't think he has a hope in hell in winning, though, to be honest with you. I don't, like, no, honestly, like, how after this performance, as a CPC member, can you look at Jason Kenney as a legitimate leader of a party? Like,
so I was talking about this, and it might have even been with Deirdre earlier, but I think the answer to that isn't all that clear yet. And in traditional Canadian politics 3 or 4 years ago, the performance of Jason Kenney and all the missteps that they've had, he would have completely disqualified himself as a potential leader of the federal party. But for me, I think that you're seeing a bit of a tectonic shift, or we're in a bit of a crossroads in terms of Western society and liberal democracies. And the indicator is going to be what the outcome of the 2019 federal election is and what the outcome of the next presidential election is. Because if you see Andrew Scheer become prime minister, or if you see Donald Trump become president again, and win a second term, I think you're going to see the discourse and what we consider to be socially acceptable continue to devolve. And I think it becomes easier for candidates and leaders who've endured these types of controversies to be able to then get past them. And so I think that I'm not 100% confident that he's closed that door at this point.
See, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, that sounds right to me as well, because I think we're seeing a devolution of not only our discourse, but also of what we expect from our leaders. And that was made possible absolutely by Donald Trump. And he's been successful with it. So you take that and you put it into the future of our representatives. And obviously people are willing to settle for a lot less.
Yeah, I mean, on one hand, I understand that, because you have people texting into radio shows that Jason Kenney can run the province from jail, and they would be okay with it.
Even if he was in jail, he would have my vote. I've seen that online as well.
Like, it just baffles me to no end.
Right?
Like,
who says that?
Like, I'm seriously, like, but there's also, the other part of this is I go back to that Charles Adler interview with him, and I wonder if the normal conservative voice is looked at what happened here with Kenney, and even a little bit with, I think there's a little bit of a different circumstance with Doug Ford than there is here, in that Kathleen Wynne, I think, just did such a terrible job that they had no choice but to make a change. And it was almost like, we'll have to deal with this for 4 years. But that's one theory that I have. But I think that there's something going on where it's like, who really are we as conservatives willing to associate with? Like, there is a legitimate, deep conversation within the conservative movement, I think. I'm hoping at the same time as, like, we cannot be beholden to some of the people that Jason Kenney has put us through. And even if he denies it, like, there is something really wrong here, and we need to make a change, or we're never going to govern again.
I unfortunately don't think that that's a common point of view, and not because people know what's going on and they're just ignoring it. I think it's because they don't actually see what's going on behind the scenes. And that, I mean, even myself, before I really became involved in politics, and I actually ended up moving fairly quickly from just average supporter, I don't have any idea what goes on behind the party, to seeing what goes on behind the party and having this connection, being able to make these connections with others who knew what were going on behind the party scene, that I don't know how to describe it, Robbie. It's definitely not on a need to know basis. It is just the fact that this information is not widely known. And I've tried to put that out, through my blogs and so on, to explain to people, this is how a political party works. This is what if you've got a leader who's saying, I hold the pen, then you don't have a party that is beholden to its members. You are actually saying this one person can make all the decisions for the entire province. But people don't tend to look at politics that way. They look at it as a party thing, especially from a party leader who keeps saying how, involved their membership is and how they listen to the membership at different times. It's a very small group of people making these decisions. And that is actually probably one of the scariest things that I found about party politics. Is it doesn't matter how many members you have if you only have 6 people making decisions.
Yeah. I think it's scary in that sense. And, I think he's just, to me, I'm trying to think about the worst misstep, but there hasn't been a day, maybe one day, maybe 2 days that we haven't heard about one questionable UCP ethical thing. I mean, even just before we recorded this podcast, Stephen Mandel has suggested that the UCP are robocalling people and announcing themselves as the Alberta Party.
Right.
There hasn't, Friday there was the Peter Singh situation. Mm-hmm. It's just, to me, this is probably, if they win, this is probably the most disastrous victory in Canadian history.
Oh, yeah.
But, yeah. And I mean, even the way that he planted Len Rhodes in Edmonton, there's just been so many missteps that it's actually, in some ways, it's hard to believe that he's going to win. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so that's what's changed my perception of his destiny to win is that I lived in Drayton Valley, which is where the Mark Smith candidate is, who made the homophobic comments. I lived there for 10 years. I lived in Edson, Whitecourt, Hinton, which are very industrial, very rural, very kind of blue-collar constituencies. I lived there for a total of about 15 years. And I had people that I worked with. I had people that I did business with. I had people that I went to school with. And they were messaging me. And I'm probably talking, I've received 50 to 100 messages in the past week or so of people saying, I got into the booth and I just couldn't do it. I thought about all the things that have gone on. I've thought about the impact that a UCP government's going to have on your community because I'm LGBTQ. I've thought about how we don't want, we kicked out what we perceive to be a corrupt government, and you've got a party that's this corrupt before they've even formed government. What are we going to get afterwards, right? So I'm hopeful, and I'm getting a sense from the feedback that I'm seeing and hearing out there on the ground that people are already having a little bit of buyer's remorse about what they might get. And so I think that might be enough to put us into a minority government situation.
What about the UCP brand as a whole? Take Jason Kenney out of this. Let's put him over here for a second. What about the party as a whole?
So the thing about brand is what people say about you, right? And it's not necessarily anything that you communicate. But in politics, more often than not, you don't vote somebody in, you vote somebody out.
Yeah.
And the thing, again, having lived in those towns, Hinton, Edson, Drayton Valley, Whitecourt, there's double-digit unemployment. There is massive, massive amounts of businesses shutting down, people losing their homes. And so it's not that the UCP brand is particularly strong. It's that there has been so much economic anxiety and destruction for people that the UCP has created a narrative of we can bring back the good times and we're here to deliver help and hope. And when you're desperate and you haven't had a paycheck for 2 years, that's a really compelling message. And so that's what the brand of the UCP is that they are selling help and hope and positivity to people who are in a desperate situation. But the problem is that they're not in a position to actually deliver that. And, you know, I've said to some people, in some ways it might be both really sad and devastating to have the UCP for 4 years. And in some ways for our civil society, it might be really good because you're going to have 4 years where things are going to be equally or more miserable than they were under the NDP. And people are going to wake up and realize that, you know, we've got to really have a fundamental conversation about what our province looks like and how do we not be so reliant on this industry that has done so much damage to our social fabric because of the drop in the price of oil. And so what Kenny's really promising is, you know, in 2014, when oil prices crashed and things got rough, he's saying, we're going to go all in on the same strategy that got us to where we are today. And that's really dangerous because people who have been sold that he's the savior and that the UCP can turn things around are going to realize that that's not the case. And the economics of heavy oil are not the same. Certainly the NDP has done things that have not helped or exacerbated the problem, but the UCP's prescription is certainly no better.
Yeah. And I think as well, as far as the brand goes, early on when the merge happened, I think there was a lot of ego stroking that this is what people wanted. And there was a lot of rhetoric around that at the time about purging the progressive from the United Conservative Party. So this was something that pretty much told anyone with any sort of progressive leaning that this party is not for you. You're not welcome. Your views are not welcome. This is a party for true conservatives. And even Stephen Harper's, editorial that week, right after when the rumors were just sky high that Brian Jean was going to step back in, they quashed that really fast with Stephen Harper, with Scott Moe. And one of the things that they kept up with was this idea that this is a party of true conservatives only. And the thing is that there are a lot of people who do not agree with a lot of the things that the UCP candidates have come out with, because they've been very anti anyone else. Right? So it's not as if it was a party that was welcoming. This was a party that said, you know, this is what you need to be. And now you can think of it too, that Greg Clark, right after Jason Kenney won the PC leadership back in 2017, Greg Clark was holding meet and greets in Edmonton and in Calgary. And one of the things that he said at that time, which people really enjoyed, was he said things he said that it was a big tent, but it had hard walls. If you don't support human rights for every Albertan, then, that's fine. That's your opinion, but you can go have it somewhere else. That opinion, that point of view is not welcome in the Alberta Party. And, he also drew that line in the sand, but it wasn't quite the same as the one that the UCP did, or maybe it was. I mean, the Alberta Party one didn't cut me out, but the UCP one did. Because I'm definitely not I don't think that I could call myself a true conservative based on the people who kept saying what a true conservative was.
Yeah, I think that Kenney has done a really, for the people that it makes this, that is attracted to the us versus them. Yeah. He has done, I think the UCP has done a really good job in creating this us versus them, like the narrative about us versus Trudeau. We're going to fire anyone that is not part of this. We're going, like if you are attracted to that kind of messaging, they have attracted that really well. But the problem is they have disengaged a lot of other people that I don't think are very comfortable with that message. I am firmly believing that most of Alberta do not want to get into a war with BC on anything. I think that there's many Albertans that want a pipeline, but truly, truly understand that there is a deep-seated issue in why this pipeline can't go a certain way. They want to find a way to rectify and work that out. I really do.
I would agree. Most people aren't. Most people don't want to shove everything down somebody else's throat. They, compromise is something that it's natural.
Yeah.
I think it's more natural than, we'll stand up. That's why I think too, like all of the attacks on Rachel Notley for, quote, not standing up for Alberta. I mean, they're not only are they totally false, but it's basically just a complaint about how she did it. She went about trying to build consensus. And the thing is, she was successful. She was very successful in building a consensus for the pipeline. So I think that I think your average voter realizes that.
I think you're right. I hope you're right. But I guess we'll see here. But on one hand, the UCP have made some missteps, and I think that that's pretty obvious. But I think we have to have this conversation a little bit. You have been given, if you're the Alberta NDP, a fastball down the middle that is just laid in there to knock right out of the park when Mark Smith is caught saying these homophobic comments. That feels to me like, and when Jason Kenney says we're going to back down on GSAs, that feels to me that as an NDPer, you've got a really great opportunity to take advantage of this from a strategic perspective. I don't know how well they did.
So in 2012, Danielle Smith was leading the polls up until a couple days before, and the Lake of Fire blog came to light, and she didn't kick Alan Huntsberger out of the party, and that turned the tide to the Redford government. And then in 2015, in the lead up to the election, Laurie Blakeman, who is a Liberal MLA, she had introduced a private member's bill to try and mandate GSAs in schools. And the Progressive Conservative government under Education Minister Gordon Dirks and Premier Prentice introduced their own government bill in an attempt to water down her version, and the backlash was very swift and caused them to retreat and ultimately introduce a bill that was very much a mirror of what Laurie Blakeman's was. So in the last two elections, social issues were the big determining factors in which way people voted. But we know how the Redford government turned out and the regret that we had there. And we also know how the election turned out for Jim Prentice and that people moved to the NDP. I would argue, I don't agree that they were accidental governments, because I don't think democracy is ever an accident.
No.
But I would argue that the magnitude of the victories that in both cases they had were unexpected and weren't the result that people were anticipating, or necessarily the result that they wanted. They wanted to teach people a lesson, but they taught them a much larger lesson than they anticipated when you look at a macro level. And so I think that looking at the past couple of elections where social issues were the big determining factor, and the quality of those governments that we've received, people are a little less willing to allow that to be their determining factor, unfortunately, in who they assign their vote to. And the other piece is that, again, with Alberta acknowledging fully that we're in a better place economically still than the majority of Canada, we're not where we were. And there's nobody who makes any amount of money who can take a 50% or 75% pay cut and have a good livelihood still. And so in most of the elections in Alberta for quite a long time, the top issues were education, healthcare, and social issues. But this one, it's not about that. And so I think that that's a big part of why people aren't changing their vote en masse, and why you don't see a huge reduction of the UCP is because people are most concerned about jobs, economy, and pipeline. And people say, well, how can you choose jobs or economy over human rights? If you can't put food on your table, or if you're at risk of losing your shelter, that's the most basic and most fundamental of human rights, is the ability to have shelter and food. And so I think it's an area where the NDP has miscalculated up until recently, is that for a lot of people, the economy is a human right because it's impacted them so drastically. And they're looking after their own realistically, their own survival, their own ability to provide for their families. And so it really boils down to that for me, is that they've lost sight of, for some people, this election is about human rights, and it's about their ability to survive.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the NDP dropped the ball a little bit, and I've seen a couple of posts, one specifically by Markham Hislop, and he basically came out and said, why NDP are you not running on your record? You did this, you did this, you did this. As far as the economy goes. And the thing is, again, if you look at it reasonably, they have done an amazing job to still, encourage investment in the province, even though oil was at the place that it was. There wasn't anything they could do about that. And so they did work at diversifying the economy. But their decision to maintain a campaign that was simply on human rights and civil rights, I think that it was a very big missed opportunity, because their economic record isn't that bad. I mean, if you can honestly say, yes, we couldn't do anything about the price of oil, but I did not hear them touting the additional investments that have happened in Alberta, not to the extent that they should have. I did not hear them talking about how they would, support retraining for individuals to be successful in this new economy. And that was, I think, their biggest misstep, because I think they have the background, they have the evidence to say, we're trying to put Alberta first, and we're trying to rebuild Alberta's economy. Yes, it doesn't look like it did before, but I think they really had an opportunity to take that line and make it successful. And they avoided it. And that, just like Robbie said, I think that encouraged people to hold their nose and vote for the one that was really talking about the economy, which, the UCP and Conservatives in general, I will say, I will give them full credit. They stick to messaging in such an amazing fashion. They're incredible at it. Brad Wall at the UCP convention in May of 2018 gave a speech, and during that speech, he mentioned how Sarah Hoffman, quote, had called Albertans sewer rats. It's a stupid statement, but honestly, they've kept so on message that even at the time, like when I was writing it again, I said, even I almost believe that that's what happened. And I know that's not the case, but they have kept to that message so tightly that even someone who knows better, like myself, is almost like, yep, that's the story. That's the line.
Yeah.
So, they, I think the NDP really dropped the ball on that. But at the same time, there are people who aren't willing to risk it.
Either way, really. I think this is...
Well, exactly. Yeah, they're not willing to risk the economy by voting NDP. They're not willing to risk human rights by voting UCP. And I think that's where Alberta Party has started to see this bit of a surge, because they have been very clear since the beginning, we can and should expect both.
Yeah.
So I think... I think it's kind of that perfect storm.
Where there is an opportunity for the Alberta Party to do something other than elbow.
Yeah.
I mean, I think a couple of other things that I think that one of the big mistake that I think the NDP also didn't do a really good job of is this perception that they were anti-pipeline and that they were, like, Kenney is beholden to this. The accusation from people like Vivian Krause, like her or not, I'm just putting this out there, that what she said, because she said it, not because it's necessarily true, but that the NDP was beholden to certain groups that were anti-pipeline, and they never truly answered that question.
Yeah.
They almost ignored it. And if that is, like, as much as, like, that would, I think that was probably one of the biggest mistakes, is like not backing away and saying, okay, or not saying, look, okay, we actually are pro pipeline, and really get that message out there. I think I think one of the biggest missteps that they've made.
It's a bit of a catch-22 for them, though, because most of their pre-governance careers were tied to organizations that were anti or are anti-pipeline, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a challenge for them in the realities of governance, especially in an energy-producing province, is that they've had to moderate their stance. But reading the tea leaves, if they lose the election, how do you come out and say, yeah, I'm pro-pipeline when you've got organizations that you've been involved with your entire public life? And like, take Shannon Phillips, for example. If she gets up and says, I'm pro-pipeline, I want this thing to go through, I apologize for the protesting that I did, for the stances I took in the past, I'm 100% in favor of the pipeline. What does that look like if she loses the election and she then flips back, right? Like, it makes it very disingenuous. And I'm very curious to see what that's going to look like if the NDP doesn't win, as to where those people wind up, because lots of them were buttering their bread in protesting pipelines and energy infrastructure development prior to forming government.
Yeah, that's a good point. It almost would feel like the Alberta, there was another error here we'll get into, but it almost feels like the Alberta NDP need a rebrand.
Oh, God, yes.
Like
100%.
Like, legit, if I was an Alberta NDP member, I would legitimately bring forward to the table, do we want to be part of the federal NDP? Did the fact that we were part of the federal NDP actually probably cost us the election, because that Alberta NDP membership is a federal NDP membership, and they are traditionally anti-pipeline. Where do you go going forward, I think, is a very interesting question, because I actually I think people, like, Rachel Notley is well loved. Like, there's no dispute about that. Like, I think Rachel Notley is a well-respected politician, and I think very much should still have a voice in Alberta. But I think that it's almost was like the word NDP is the swear word that killed them. But actually, if you look at what has been done, it actually hasn't been that terrible.
No. And that was, I think in 2017, I wrote something that was essentially saying that if the NDP does not sever ties with the federal NDP, it would be the biggest failure to launch of 2018. I really expected them to attempt to do something, because after Jagmeet Singh came out and said, I support BC over Alberta, it just gave more fuel to the opposition. And I mean, their entire governing term started with problems with the federal NDP. From the LEAP manifesto in October of 2015 in Edmonton, they dropped that on them in Edmonton, and it put them at odds with the federal portion of the party so early on. I don't understand why they didn't. It was an awful choice to remain as part of the party, for sure.
Yeah, I just don't know I don't know what the next step is in that, but I think that that's something that they're going to have to look at. The other part of this, I don't think this was as big, but for all of the UCP eruptions, I want to read. This was posted on a friend of mine's Facebook. His daughter is 18, and she received a call. So I'm just going to read this. I've received only one call from any party during this whole election campaign. My daughter gets multiple calls a day. Never discount how smart an 18-year-old is on the issues. Last night, the NDP called. They pointed out how they raised minimum wage. My daughter says she is 18 and pointed the resulting prices increase everywhere and high unemployment, which has made it impossible to find a job, companies cutting jobs, and adults filling the jobs that used to be available to students. NDP are lost for words. They pointed out how Rachel Notley has no nomination scandals. She points out how the party did nothing when my daughter points out how the party did nothing when police were called to investigate the candidate nomination in our area. There was a scandal there, and it was in the news. NDP are lost for words. They talk about the sexism, racism, and ethics and other issues with UCP, and she points out that she cannot support them either. The NDP is lost for words. My daughter points out that she must vote, but there's no way in hell she's voting Liberal. NDP are lost for words. The conversation went for about 15 minutes. I think that the other part of this, that my point is for some people, I wonder if the fact that there were some struggles and the NDP did not show themselves as the cleaner, pardon my use of this, more saintly, holier part. They tried to portray themselves as we're the holier party than the other party, but when you looked closer, it wasn't as bad as the UCP, but they certainly weren't clean.
Oh, absolutely.
No, and I mean, so I stopped by the Alberta Party campaign office today to grab breakfast with my old boss. And they had a flyer up that had been distributed in Stephen Mandel's riding, and it was from the NDP, and it had a picture of the candidate with the premier on the front of it. And on the back of it, it says, "Only Notley or Kenney can be premier. Vote Alberta Party, get Kenney. Vote Rachel, get Rachel." And it's so slimy and skeezy, and it's just so Sorry?
Missed the middle part. Vote Alberta Party, get Kenney.
Yeah. You missed it? Or
No, when you were repeating it, you said, oh, maybe you didn't.
Yeah.
Okay. All good. And it's just really slimy and really skeezy, and it's just so disrespectful to democracy and to the first past the post system. And for a party that has tried so hard to paint the Alberta Party as conservative light or PC 2.0, it's really telling that they're trying to say that a vote for the Alberta Party is a vote for Kenney, because if you're voting for the Alberta Party and that helps Kenney, that means you're splitting the NDP vote. So there's some real, just logic failure on the part of both the NDP and the UCP, who have both been attacking the Alberta Party in the leading days into the election. And it's just really telling to see who they perceive to be the threat and have the momentum.
Yeah, and I saw that sign there too, because someone pointed that out on Twitter, and there was a debate about that, and I think that was in some people's minds that it's like, okay, the UCP is bad, but what's the difference between the UCP and the NDP in terms of ethics? Mm-hmm. And I think that there's some fairly obvious answers, but in terms of a narrative, did the NDP? I know some people disagree, but I still think that the way that they presented those two candidates with the sexual misconduct issue and how that handled, I don't think that rubbed people the right way. There was the Craig Coulihan controversy, and yes, he apologized. I'm not going to use the communist one, whatever, but there was the Crusade one. They had their own little missteps from candidates as well. That they didn't necessarily handle perfectly either. So, and I'm not saying that, it's, Craig Coulihan apologized. So, but at the same time, it's like, I can see the argument from some people is what's the difference between person A and person B? So,
yeah. Ethically speaking, I think they were not as squeaky clean as they wanted to be, And I think that's another thing where they dropped the ball and didn't act as they expected, as they claimed they expected the UCP to act. Right. Yeah. So they were essentially just saying, well, you should have done this. Well, we don't have to do that because we already have higher moral ground, or whatever you want to say about it. And people that think about that closely enough will have those questions for sure.
Yeah. The one difference that I do see between the NDP quote unquote scandals and the UCP is you take Mark Smith and his comments coming to light, and he says, I'm sorry that people got offended.
Yeah. I don't remember saying it anyway.
I don't remember saying it. I'm sorry that it was portrayed this way.
I'm sorry that I wrote it out that way.
Yeah. And then he says, and Jason Kenney says, well, I think that they're reprehensible and Mark Smith should reach out to the community and have a dialogue. So I sent out a message and I said, hey, you know what? Yeah, let's have a dialogue. I lived in your constituency for 10 years, Mark Smith. I lived 5-minute walk from the church where you gave that sermon when you gave it. So you want to have a dialogue? Sure, let's have a dialogue. Let's talk about why it's hurtful, why it is dangerous to have that conversation. You look at the NDP candidate who posted the meme about the Crusades and jihad, and he came forward and he said, I'm genuinely sorry for having posted it, and I think that it's wrong. And I'm going to seek out some education and some dialogue with the community so that I can do a better job. And I'm a firm believer in second chances. I believe people make mistakes. But the difference between I'm genuinely sorry and I'm sorry that I got caught because it's politically expedient is vastly different. And for me, that's the difference in the two cases that we've talked about, is that when the NDP does have a mistake, they genuinely apologize for it. They try to atone for it and they try to take action that makes it right. The UCP tries to justify it, apologize for people getting offended, and then tries to downplay or minimize or rationalize it. And so that's what the difference for me is between the two.
Yeah, I would agree with that presentation. If politics is narrative, that's what some people are gonna, like, in an instant reaction, are gonna look at as like, you know, column A and column B. But it is important to look at the context of how one person has responded to that. And I'm just curious, has Mark actually reached out to you?
No. And I mean, of course, as a partisan person, I didn't really anticipate or expect that, because I spend a good portion of my time attacking Jason Kenney and the UCP in their positions. But there's no meaningful effort to. And, you know, that they've set up this SOC organization in LGBT, which is really just a public relations group that they try to use to justify their homophobia and transphobia. And they have been invited on numerous occasions to attend pride parades with grassroots groups and to have a dialogue about why they're not included and why their positions are problematic, but they're only interested in hearing from people that validate them. Mm. And until they do that, they're not going to be seen as allies or as people who are credible on these issues with the broader community.
It is interesting. But to me, the other thing is, you know, okay, so you're attacking my party. I found out that I offended you. I have some sort of responsibility at some point. And maybe now isn't the time because you're in a campaign or not. But I wonder how, at some point, I have a right to reach out to you and have that dialogue. So, I mean, hopefully he does. And, you know, he's probably, the chances are over 50% he's going to win a seat. So I think, I hope he does it. But
I'm not going to hold my breath.
No.
I don't expect that he will, but I'm willing to sit with anybody because I truly, genuinely believe when you try to see a problem from other people's perspectives, and that almost any problem can be solved with dialogue, but it starts with actually making an honest effort to push yourself outside of your echo chamber.
Yeah. To get to the Alberta Party, and then we're going to talk a little bit about media editorials here after this. But get to the Alberta Party. So going into this, there has been some controversy about the Alberta Party in that a lot of people felt that it was a mistake to bring in Stephen Mandel over Greg Clark. There were some people that had some questions about some of the decisions and conversations that Stephen Mandel had. And where the Alberta Party is going. So as we are now 2 days before here, where are we with the Alberta Party? Are we moving in a positive direction here, or was this a setback?
It's a bit of a loaded question.
That's what we do.
Yeah, because, there's obviously some sentimental attachment to Greg Clark and people that were really big fans of Greg Clark. And they were coming to the Alberta Party at a time that they were just starting to get to know Greg, and the trajectory seemed to be on the upswing. But Greg's the person who made that decision. I was very intimately connected to those discussions that he was having with his supporters. And I know that there's a narrative out there that he was pushed, but I can tell you in no uncertain terms that Greg is the very first person who put that out as an option, and he's the person who advanced it at almost every stage of the discussion. And so, I have a huge amount of respect for Greg. I've learned a ton of stuff about politics from Greg. But the thing that I wish is people that love and respect Greg would listen to what Greg has said in his own words. And it would be very easy for Greg to come out and say, you know what, I was absolutely pushed. It wasn't my decision. And, it would completely, in my view, decimate the Alberta Party. But, he's an adult with his own agency. He was able to make a decision on his own. And the only way in the Alberta Party Constitution for a leader to be forced out is for that leader to make the decision themselves. Outside of after every general election, there's a required leadership confidence vote. After every general election, not every leadership election. So, the struggles that the Alberta Party was having, A, we didn't have organizational infrastructure. B, we weren't fundraising what we needed to get our message out. We were certainly punching above our weight in terms of organic social media reach. And towards the end of my term on the board, we did a much better job in getting traditional media to take an interest in us and give us earned media stories. But in doing a leadership race, when I joined the party, we had 760 members. When I left the board and stopped working for the party, we had well over 10,000. So that type of growth in a party in the course of, it was, call it 18 months, would not have happened without a leadership race. And those were the things that Greg cited when he stepped down in November of 2017, was that we need more money, more members, more media. This accomplishes all three objectives. And you look at the fundraising results under Stephen Mandel, we will have raised pretty close to $2 million during the period of his leadership. You look at the leadership growth that occurred, and certainly Cara Levis, who was another leadership candidate, and Rick Fraser contributed to that. But Stephen Mandel, by and large, was the driver of the growth in membership, which is why he won the leadership in such a landslide. And the media coverage that we've had has been exponentially larger. And we've clearly established ourselves as the third party. Looking at the polls, we're anywhere from 8 to 14% that I've seen recently. So the thing that I've learned in all this is there's no easy answer, and building a party from the grassroots is very hard. And we don't have a federal party that's supporting us. We don't have like the UCP does, where the Conservatives and Stephen Harper and Andrew Scheer are giving them their lists, coming out and doing rallies for them, communicating on their behalf. We don't have the federal Liberals or the NDP that are supporting us. Granted, the provincial NDP doesn't at this point have the federal NDP support, but they did in the last election. And so, you know, what we're really having to do is we're having to go out and connect face-to-face, one-on-one in the community and really grind it out and do it the hard way. And I'm not so confident that if Greg was the leader, we would have succeeded in getting 87 candidates. I think we would have done much better than the last election, but I'm not confident that we would have got there. And for a lot of people, that is a sign of viability. Are you able to run a slate of candidates across the board? And if you can do that, then you're a credible choice to form government. Because in the last election, we only ran 36 candidates. So even if we ran 100%, we would at best form the official opposition. So we've made very large leaps in terms of organization, in terms of membership, in terms of growth, in terms of infrastructure. The key thing is that if we don't form government on Tuesday, which I'm not anticipating that we will, we just have to keep that going and, you know, take a day or two to lick our wounds, but then start immediately focusing on building for 2023. Who's the next generational leadership, and what do we need to do to continue to grow the infrastructure and the membership and connect in our communities?
Yeah, I 100% agree with Robbie. There are a lot of people who don't like what had happened, but you know, I spoke with CBC last weekend, and they were asking about the smaller parties, about FCP and Alberta Independence Party and Alberta Advantage Party, but they were asking about how these parties gain notoriety, how they gain support. And my response to that was that their biggest obstacle is gaining support outside of wherever they've started. And that is something that I think the Alberta Party did struggle with, is that it was viewed as a Calgary party. We had our only MLA was in Calgary. The majority of the board members were out of Calgary. It wasn't viewed as a provincial party. Mm-hmm. And if you were looking at the Alberta Party in 2015, their website was 100% geared towards flood mitigation in Calgary Elbow. It was 100% centered right around Greg Clark and the riding that he was running in. Now, being outside of Calgary, that meant nothing to me. Flood mitigation is great for Calgary Elbow. Out in rural Alberta, it's not really an issue I have to deal with, but I liked other parts of their platform. Now, what the election of Stephen Mandel did was it made the Alberta Party more provincial. Suddenly, it's now getting, you know, like Robbie said, it's getting more media, and that media is in Edmonton. That media is, you know, even my mom, I remember her saying, "Oh, big coup for the Alberta Party," the former mayor of Edmonton. And so that's what resonated with her was, you know, this was that connection. And so I think it did what it was supposed to do. there are definitely more people looking at the Alberta Party. Our ability to actually be in the leadership debate was huge, and it absolutely helped do what it was supposed to do. Now, what that turns into after the election, I can't say for sure. But I think it did what it was supposed to do at the time.
Well, a couple of things that I think the Alberta Party did gain is they've gone beyond this reputation, fairly or not, as a social media party. There was ground gained as like a legitimate, we have some candidates that are very interesting, we have some interesting ideas, and I think Mandel gave that credibility to it and created a little bit of friction because there is some controversy around Mandel, but it caused a conversation that, and Greg Clark was hugely respectful to me too, so, Mandel created a little bit of friction, which I think was a good thing. But the other thing that I think the Alberta Party has done really well and and this is so funny that it's not actually, it's a little thing, but I think that this was so important. The quality of Gar, I think, has becoming one of the more enjoyable people in this campaign. And it was part because of the quality of that video was just so fantastic that you could do nothing but it didn't matter what side you were on. You just you had to pay it. It was like, that video was incredible. Mm-hmm. And I think it just gained some respectability for where the Alberta Party is. It's like, okay, we're going to be taken seriously. I'm going to be taken seriously. And I think it allowed people to say, okay, I think that there's something to look at if I don't like the UCP and I don't like the NDP and I feel, and I'm using air quotes, politically homeless, the Alberta Party may seem like an option for me. Even though they may not win, I feel like that there's an opportunity to me to hang my hat somewhere there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think to me it was a good thing. Now, we'll see how many seats that they end up getting and who wins and who doesn't. But I think overall that this election, I think it feels like it was generally a success for the Alberta Party.
I would absolutely agree with that. I think our showing will be stronger in this election than we've ever had before. And that's something, like I said, people who voted for the Alberta Party outside of Calgary-Elbow obviously found something to resonate with, even though the Alberta Party's platform at that time was very geared towards Calgary-Elbow.
Yeah.
So you could almost say that every vote that went to the Alberta Party was obviously because of something else in the platform that really resonated with people. For me, it was that that an MLA for the Alberta Party is expected to represent their constituency, even if they don't agree with everything else the Alberta Party is doing. For me, that was huge. I mean, absolutely, I want my representative to represent me because I'm in rural, right? Obviously, the platform itself wasn't really geared towards people outside of Calgary-Elbow, but that was something that really resonated with me and really made me perk up and say, that's what I want. I want a representative. And the party itself being, relying on this evidence-based decision-making and some consensus, realizing that they're not going to have a perfect platform, but that everyone who represents the party and represents constituency may be coming to the table with different needs, and that needs to be worked out. It's not the party platform over everything. It's the people that are being represented. And so that was what drew me.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting what happens going forward for sure. What they do, whether it's Mandel or it's someone else that ends up taking that leadership mantle, I think it's going to be very interesting. But I think overall, I think that this was a good step for the Alberta Party in an environment that I think a lot of people felt was toxic. I think that they came out with a positive thing. So I think that that's certainly good there. Go ahead. Oh,
no, I just said I think so as well.
Yeah. So in 2015, there was an editorial that came out in the Edmonton Journal that angered many people. Angered everyone. Because, well, no, I'm going to say it angered many people because there were some people that were really happy about it.
It's true.
It did not. The rumors were going around that in the Edmonton Journal world that there were some employees that were furious that this editorial came out because it did not represent what they viewed or their thoughts, but it was basically the rumors was this was dictated to them and they had to basically submit it, and that was that. Lo and behold, what happens is we get another editorial that basically the end of this editorial is let me find it here. Because certainly Jason Kenney made sure that this was retweeted, and which is, I can understand. It's endorsing the...
I have it.
Do you? Yeah. Can you read basically the end of it?
Yep.
Thank you.
The election comes down to competing bid of Alberta. On Tuesday, voters should choose UCP.
How do you feel about editorials generally, no matter what, endorsing who we should be voting for? Is this crossing a line? Is this a tradition? Because it's been traditional. It's happened all the time. We've had this for years. People have argued. For those that are getting upset about this happens all the time. It's no big deal. Or is this crossing an ethical journalistic line that we need to change?
Robbie?
Yeah. So I'm kind of ranty about this for sure. So in this case, in the last two elections, it's been really clear that this was a corporate directive. And I know for a fact because Senator Paula Simons was a columnist for the Edmonton Journal when the last endorsement came out. And she has tweeted that it was absolutely a dictated endorsement from the offices in Toronto the last time that it happened. And she even said that the editor of the journal had expressed her displeasure and disagreement with that endorsement, and as a result, she was let go. So she believes that the same thing has happened this time, and one of the really interesting bits about this editorial endorsement is that every editorial that appears in the Edmonton Journal normally has a disclaimer at the bottom that it's the consensus opinion of I believe it's 4 editors of the Edmonton Journal and Post Media. This one conspicuously did not have that. And so to me, as somebody who reads the paper quite closely and pays a lot of attention, this was the editor's way of very subtly saying, this is not our opinion. Because when it's in there 365 days a week, and on this endorsement it's not, to me they're sending a message. So yeah, it's really, really, in my view, in the last 2 elections, it's putting the narrative, well, it's putting corporate interests ahead of what's really best for the populace. And it's where there's a disconnect between journalistic integrity and corporate self-interest. And so I've just found these tweets from Senator Paula Simon. So she says, last time around, the editorial was dictated almost literally from post-media bosses in Toronto. My heart hurts for my Edmonton Journal friends at the thought that this might have happened again. Also, last time the paper's editor ended up losing her job, in part because she simply acknowledged publicly that the editorial was dictated by Toronto. So that certainly is a disincentive to be forthcoming.
Yeah, and I just think it puts people in such an awkward position because anyone that reads Paula Simons would know that she's not going to be endorsing Jason Kenney in any way, or any way, shape, or form, the UCP in any way, shape, or form. But it's even that, even if it is or it isn't, it puts the reporters in such an awkward position of what they're actually reporting that it's almost unfair to them as employees that you're doing this. Yeah.
Well, and in particular in Edmonton, having worked in media relations for over 2 years, the reporters at the Edmonton Journal are some of the finest reporters that exist in this country. They are rigorous in their ability to get the story and to present it in a balanced and fair way. I have always found that they don't hesitate to criticize anybody, regardless of what party they come from. And when something is reported, they do it objectively, they do it fact-based. And even the Edmonton Journal as a newspaper as a whole, they have some left-leaning columnists and they have some right-leaning columnists. And if you look at their production as a whole, they do such a nice job of presenting a balanced picture overall. And so it's just so unfortunate because the caliber of the people that they have working for them is so good that the corporate interests taking precedence in some of these decisions makes it hard for people to support that newspaper. And I canceled my subscription today because for me, imagine if the NDP was to say, we're going to triple tax rates and we're going to put in as much regulation as we possibly can. We're going to look to take the number of regulations we have on business and industry and double or triple them over the next 4 years. And imagine that a newspaper was to say, you know what, these are non-starters and they'll be bad for business, but we're going to endorse the NDP anyways because they're good for people. Businesses would be setting their hair on fire.
Right.
And rightfully so. And so when you've got a column that's dictated, potentially dictated, I should say, when you've got an endorsement that says, you know what, we've got a government that's told us they're going to roll back protections for LGBTQ kids. We've got a government that's told us that they're going to implement these potentially harmful policies. Those should be non-starters, but the economy is more important, so give them a chance and let's hope. It doesn't make sense, and it's morally corrupt for that corporation, and I'm saying corporation, to give that type of an endorsement. And so I just can't support with my dollars a company that has that viewpoint.
Now, the counteract that someone has pointed out is, what about the Danielle Smiths and the Ryan Jespersons and the Charles Adlers of the world that are giving an actual opinion? And Danielle Smith has been pretty public in saying who she's voting for. Ryan Jesperson has not necessarily said who he's voting for, but but he's also said I think it's pretty clear who he's not voting for. What about that though? Is that for those people out there that think that there is that's not different? What are your thoughts on that? Because I do think that there's a big difference, but I want to hear what you have to say on that.
Well, for me, what's important is that there be a clear distinction between who is presenting the news and who is presenting opinion. And an opinion should be rooted in fact. And the problem is that in some cases we've crossed the line into people sharing uninformed opinions.
Yeah.
And you know what? If we want to have a healthy debate about, as a society, whether we think a 10% tax is good or 7 or eliminate taxes altogether, that's a policy discussion. And you can have a discussion about what the best approach is, but do it from a place of looking at jurisdictions that have implemented those policies. Do it from a place of looking at research and evidence. But the problem is we're getting to a point with some of these groups where it's like gay kids deserve to have protection from being kicked out of their homes. Well, maybe they do, maybe they don't. Or we've reached a point in our society now where, you know what, immigrants are stealing jobs from white people, and so immigrants shouldn't be allowed here. Well, we're all immigrants. So, you know, like some of those things, like we can have a debate about the levels of immigration or the type of vetting that we do to make sure that we aren't letting in immigrants who are a security risk. Those are all valid discussions. But when a country is being bombed by its leader, it is incumbent upon us to find a way to make sure that those people are protected. Mm-hmm. And some of that means bringing people into our country and making sure that they're protected, right? And so for me, there's just some things that are, when you boil it down to it, it's about human decency. And you've got people who are in positions of influence and power that are sharing opinions that are counter to human decency and have real significant repercussions on people's lives. And for me, that's a line that just shouldn't be crossed. If your policy making potentially ends up with people dying, it's not a good policy.
No. And making money off of these policies, like, you know, donate to me by click here, you know, like, and which is gross. But for some reason they're making money, or they seem to be making money, or doing very well for some reason or another. Which I think it will lead to a future conversation about media ethics at some point in time, because I do think that is, and I'm not going to only blame the right on this, because I think the left was very much I had some issues with some of the things that the left were doing, but we'll leave that for a debrief for another time. But to me, I think that there's such a difference between, like, they're paid people to have an opinion, and, you know, they have to be fair, sure, but that's opinion. This is like a newspaper that is representing a bunch of employees, and you're saying that me as an employee is voting UCP when that's not necessary. No, you're stealing my opportunity there, and that's not fair. Like, to me, you know, I don't know. I feel bad for the employees at the Journal, and in Post Media, because I think that they were put in an awkward position again. I mean, if they, at the very least, if you're going to have an editorial that points out why to vote Kenney, I think that it's very fair to have someone with an editorial why to vote Notley or Mandel. I think that is balanced, that's fair, and we as people can sit and look at that and make a decision. But to come out and say that you're supporting one party when it, you know, from a corporate position in Toronto, I think it's so awkward and icky and slimy to me.
Yeah, well, and they might be a little more credible if in the entire history of the newspaper they endorse somebody else. Yeah. Right? Like when you always land on the same answer, then, you know, you have to be a little skeptical, right? Yeah. And what's the benefit to that organization is the filter with which you need to look at whether it's ethical or intelligent, even.
Yeah. Okay. Did you have some thoughts on that, Deirdre? Or?
I guess basically, like, very, very similar. People who listen to Danielle Smith know that she is absolutely biased, and that's fine. She's there to give her opinion and to give a conservative view of of the information that she's taking in. I do think that Jesperson is more fair, just like Rob Breckenridge is more fair. I have heard him a number of times, when someone calls in with a talking point, he has pushed them to find out where that actually comes from. Are you just repeating something that you've heard, or are you, did you come to this conclusion on your own? And so I think that in some ways, I do think that the opinion columnists, the opinion people like Danielle Smith have crossed a line to a point, because I don't honestly believe that she's evaluating things fairly. Now, again, that just speaks to her own bias, which is, again, fine. That's why she's there. She's there because she was controversial as a talk show host to begin with, because people were angry with her. But there were a lot of people that still respected her opinion. And as the campaigns drew closer to the writ dropping, and even after the writ dropped, I mean, personally, I haven't found that she has been fair so much as she has been, I don't even want to say a shill, but sort of, to listen to the things that she has come out with since the writ has dropped, there is absolutely no, there's no critical thinking there. It's just, how do I put this in a better light for the Conservative Party? So,
well, let's be honest. Rick Bell, Licia Corbella, and Danielle Smith are the public relations arm of the United Conservative Party. That's 100% what they are. And, I even see this in politics. You've got Joe Maglioka, city councillor in Calgary, Sean Chu, Jeremy Farkas, out supporting UCP candidates. I know of, conservatively, I'll say 24 municipal leaders or councillors across the province. I'm talking mayors, councillors, that are members of the Alberta Party, have been involved with it in some form or another, and they're too scared to come out and support the Alberta Party. Why is there a double standard that way? I know of civic leaders and school board trustees who are NDP members and supporters and all that, and you don't even see them coming out to the same effect in supporting the NDP. So why is it okay for this one group, but everybody else has to hide their political allegiance and be ashamed of it? And it's so unhealthy for Alberta and for democracy to have that environment. You should be able to have a lawn sign. You should be able to wear whatever color it is that you're supporting and not be belittled or bullied into supporting somebody else. And you should be able to do that with pride. And it's real concerning, the environment and the toxicity around supporting anybody but the Conservative Party and the kind of herd mentality that there is.
Yeah, but I mean, you're also going to hear people on the other side are going to say, what about a group like Press Progress, who is quite obviously for the NDP? Now, I guess the question that comes down to is, where do you put Press Progress in the media landscape? But we are sharing their content. We are reading their content too, right? So, I mean, and that's the other side of that, is that, yes, Smith, Bell, Corbella are quite obvious where they stand, but there are people in media in the big picture media that are on the other side of that too. But I do agree with you ultimately. I think, I think it's fair to, instead of maybe this objective, like, oh, we don't tell anyone, maybe we need to open that door and say, yeah, where do you stand? Like, why is it okay for Jeremy Farkas and Sean Chu and those guys to say it's okay for the UCP, and a guy like Mayor Nenshi to say nothing? Like, why as a mayor does he have to sit there and be silent about who he's going to support?
Well, you know what? I get it as a mayor because you do have to work with whoever's elected. But I've heard the same thing, like I said, from many town councillors. Like, there's a few high-profile city councillors that, like I said, have been involved in the past in organizing and being a part of the Alberta Party. And if, A, they won't come to events anymore because they're worried about the repercussions, and B, if they do, they are incredibly camera shy, and it's not good. It's not healthy. People should be able to participate in whatever party they want and have their views represented, and do that without having any sort of repercussions or whatnot.
Yeah.
But the repercussions are real, though. I was on the doors for a candidate, actually, who was running against Sean Chu in the 2017 municipal election, and the number of people were and said, I'm conservative for my province. This is what I expect from my city councillor. It was actually a very large number. So when you are, I think, representing a city area, if you've been on the doors and you know that the majority of the people who supported you or support the Conservative Party are also, I don't think that you have as much of an issue coming forward with that, but there are absolutely people who don't necessarily support the UCP, but they heard it on the doors. And even though they were elected to represent their riding in the city, they know that might be a hugely conservative riding, and it's actually not safe for them to come out and say, I don't support this party, because they know already that their constituents do.
Right.
So I think it's a tough spot for like municipal councillors to be in when, like I said, they've been on the doors. They know what people are saying.
Yeah, I get that. I think, but what I think that Robbie's trying to say is it's why is it cushy for the Bells and the Corbellas specifically to sit and act a certain way with feeling like there's no repercussions, and other people who support other sides getting those repercussions? That's not good for democracy. Like, it's not. But at the same time, you've got Bell, who is, well, Bell and Corbella both, who are controversial columnists. So I don't think that everyone who reads a Rick Bell column thinks, extremely highly of what his opinion is. But because of the controversy that they dig up, it keeps people reading. Yeah. So to me, it, I guess, could be looked at as a bit of a business decision as well, that there are a lot of people who agree with this person, and yes, there are some people who disagree with this person, and they still read it. So I think that's where you end up with this double standard is, and I think you would really need someone who's on the exact opposite end of Rick Bell to be able to generate the same amount of controversy,
but still they have to have the support. So I think that's a tough line. And in Alberta, it does seem to be that if you are conservative, you have more support than you have controversy. But you are still controversial. So I think I think that is probably based on readership and movement of your articles, for sure.
Right. Now, this will lead down we'll change this here, but I think I talked about this yesterday on the hockey podcast. I hope in this federal election campaign that the CRTC in some ways is an issue, because I think one of the things that I do think needs to happen, that needs to be a stronger presence, is the power of why I believe in the power of podcasts, because I think that they're giving a very strong alternative version to media that is not in the mainstream media, but are given some really realistic and balanced and fair opportunities out there. But the problem is that it's so limited in how far and where you can go in Canada. And I hope that the CRTC and media is a part of the federal election issues, because I do think that is important. So, let's go on here. We're just going to finish this off here with predictions. Let's do this. What are your predictions going into Tuesday in terms of seats?
Go ahead, Deirdre.
Okay, so one of the reasons why I'm so unsure, and this is actually, I feel like this is a special place to be, is being unsure about what's going to happen on Tuesday. Now, the first thing that I want to say is that our advanced polls, being so high, 696,000 people voted in the advanced polls, but 233,000 people voted outside of their polling areas. That is a huge number.
Mm-hmm.
Because of that, we will not know who forms government on Tuesday. That's my prediction, because on an average, and I doubt that this is actually an 87 riding average, but on average, it's 2,678 votes. That's how many possibly outside of the ridings that there might be. In 2015, there were 47 parties who got less than who won with less than 2,000 votes. 47 ridings. So that's a huge number. Like that is the difference between a majority government and a minority government. 2,678 votes per riding. They will have to send those back. So there's no way we're going to know on Tuesday who has formed government. It's just too big of a number. And while I realize that's not indicative of per riding, that absolutely can sway a lot of the urban ridings. And so you've got people who maybe voted somewhere because that's where they worked or that's where they were shopping. I remember seeing a post where people had been in IKEA and voted. So we're not going to know on Tuesday who forms government. We won't know until they said it would be done by Saturday. But honestly, the number is way too high for us to know on Tuesday. In 2015, even though there was 47 who got less than 2,000 votes between the winner and the next runner-up, 26 of those ridings less than 1,000 between the winner and the second runner-up. So again, these numbers are just too big. So I want to say I want to say that we may end up with a really big surprise, and that surprise would be an NDP government again. And I think it's very possible. There were over 200,000 or almost 200,000 additional votes that went to the NDP in 2015. With the number of people who said PC voters just stayed home, they were so upset, then that actually means there were more new voters that ended up putting their votes towards the NDP. I still think it's very possible for the NDP to come out with a majority government. And the thing is, I honestly hope more than anything that we have a huge voter turnout. And the reason that I hope that is because I do not want to hear the phrase accidental government over the next 4 years. Oh. Right? Like I'm so sick of that statement, and I honestly would love to see, 80% turnout, and I honestly don't even care who they vote for. If they elect a UCP government, I will 100% accept that, because that is what, like a lot of people showed up. This is what they want. I just want to see an adamant, I just want to see support. That's all that I want. I want undeniable support for this party's vision. And if they succeed, great. And if they fail, fine. But I want to see support.
Okay, so you're going NDP majority.
I'm thinking that they very well could come out with a majority still, yeah.
Interesting. Okay. All right.
You don't hear every day?
No, I'm not. No, it's okay. That's good, though. That's good. Robbie?
I believe that it's going to be a minority government. And it's going to go one of two ways. It is either going to be NDP or UCP, bold prediction.
Yeah, bold.
Yeah. So I think that you're going to see somewhere in the ballpark of 42 to 43 seats. My gut is telling me it's going to be UCP. You're going to see the official opposition formed with somewhere in the ballpark of 30 to 34 seats. And so if you were to hold a gun to my head, I would say UCP 43 seats, NDP 34, Alberta Party 5, and the Liberals maybe squeak out 1.
Do they get Calgary Mountain View?
Yeah, Angela Kokott is an amazing candidate. I just worry a little bit that because David Swan has been out canvassing for David Kahn and the bump that he's received from the leadership debate and his laying pipe comment, that he might be able to sneak up the middle and pull off a win there.
But Calgary Mountain View is going to be someone sneaking up the middle. I don't think there's any way around that. It's either to be, it doesn't matter if it's NDP, Liberal, or Alberta Party. That person is going to benefit from the split.
Yeah, in my view, that's the most competitive riding in the entire province.
Yeah,
followed by Calgary Elbow, and it really could come down to a coin toss there.
Yeah, I don't find a lot of competitiveness in a number of the ridings, but those two are huge. Those two are definitely huge.
So I am also predicting a minority government. I have stuck with that from January 1st in my bold prediction this year, so I'm sticking with it. I think the way that I look at this, Edmonton is going to go NDP for the most part. I don't know if they're going to sweep. I think Mandel has a shot to win his riding. Urban, for the most part, Central Alberta, maybe Northern Alberta will probably go UCP. So that's the split there. The challenge, I think, is Southern Alberta, because I think Calgary is going to be overall a battleground. I think whoever wins Calgary will win the election. There is some logic. But I also do think the rural parts of Southern Alberta, Lethbridge, around there, I don't necessarily think is fully UCP, could be NDP. I'm thinking we are going to get a 40-seat NDP minority.
Okay.
Interesting.
I'm thinking I think that I got the Alberta Party winning 4-5. If the Liberals win, if Con wins Calgary Mountain View, we're down to that's 81. So I'm looking like I think in 40-35, and I'm thinking that this is going to be an NDP minority.
Okay.
I could be wrong, but I definitely I've been back in the minority train, and it's just to me the path to victory for both sides is so it's really hard to say that one person has a path to victory over another, and I know the polls are showing something else, but polls are lying. Polls are polls. I think in the end, I think the NDP is just going to squeak out a minority.
So that's actually good. That's 3 different predictions.
Yes. Yes. All right. What are you guys doing on Election Day? Well, we'll kind of tell us what your plans are. What are you going to do?
So I can't tell definitively, but I've been approached to potentially be on a couple of political panels on TV. So as soon as I have confirmation as to where I'm going to be 100%, I'll let you know.
Awesome. All right.
I have no plans right now. I'm expecting to, just bite my nails and watch everything come up and see how that goes.
Yeah, I will be posting on social media. I will not be part of any political panels. I have a face for radio, so.
I will also, however, be listening to the Strategist podcast, because they have promised that they will be putting out a podcast on election night.
Oh, there we go.
Yes. No, they promised they would record a podcast on election night.
That's true.
If the NDP wins, Corey Hogan works for them, and so does Zane Belgie. You'll never see that thing.
Damn it! Well, then they suck. Okay, well, there goes my plans for election night.
Oh.
So, yeah. So I guess same as last year. Just turn on. But again, like I'm not as super excited about this, because I know that there is very little chance they're going to be able to call the election.
Yeah. I think you're right. I don't think we're going to be, because it's a minority, I don't think we're going to be able to get that anyway. So I'm with you on that. So
it's actually, I'm less excited about election night than I was last year. Last year I was super excited. I watched, I listened. This year I'm kind of like, yeah, no, we're not going to know for sure until Saturday. They said it could take as long as, they said it could take until Saturday to know for sure, but they would do it as fast as they possibly could. So no, I'm not as excited, but in some cases, because Edmonton, the 47 ridings that won by less than 2,000 were pretty much all outside of Edmonton. So it's it's still something to see what happens as far as Edmonton goes. Like those were massive wins. Lethbridge West with Shannon Phillips was a massive win. There was, like 5,000 or 6,000 votes in between the winner and the second runner-up. So it'll just depend on what those final numbers are as to whether or not I think that we can possibly call government. But like I said, that's 233,000 votes. That's a huge number. I don't expect that we're going to be able to call government, because I do expect them to be close, especially outside of Edmonton.
And the other thing, I think that there's a 4% chance of this happening, but like depending on the Alberta Party seats, they could prop someone up. I'm not seeing that happens.
If it's a minority government, they have to, right?
Yeah.
And so it'll just be really interesting to see, do they take the same approach as the Green Party did in BC and make themselves available to discuss a governance agreement with both parties and see who offers up the most in terms of concessions and implementing pieces of the Alberta Party platform?
Yeah.
Actually, no, there's a good question, because if it is a minority government, the Alberta Party doesn't have to, or any of the other parties in the legislature don't have to prop up the government. It can just be a minority government, and right? Like they could.
Yeah, but you would need to have an agreement at least to support the throne speech and the first budget, because if not, then the government would fall and we would be back to an election. And strategically, I think that's really dangerous for the Alberta Party to not support a first budget, just because then you go back to the polls and the incentive is to punish the people get rid of the minority and punish the people who've triggered an election.
Yeah.
So what people are looking for is they're looking for some stability, and regardless of who winds up forming government, I think the Alberta Party, if they're supporting a minority, has to come to an agreement with one of the two parties to prop them up and support them for a reasonable period of time.
Yeah.
I see that. I hate the idea of that, because who would they support? And what would that do to the support for the party? Like, I hate the idea of them having to choose one over the other.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's a difficult decision. But like I said, I think what you do is you pick the pieces of legislation or platform that were most important to you. You take a look at the platforms of the other two parties and what are the two most egregious things that two or three most egregious things that are off the table completely. And then you use that as a starting point for negotiations, and whoever's able to do the most for you, that's the person that you agree to support on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah. That's what the Green Party is doing, really. Like, they propped up the NDP, but it's really been at a case-by-case basis.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, then I guess my hope would be that they would be as transparent as possible during that decision making.
Yep.
I think that would be their best move forward, to explain what they were supporting, what they absolutely did not support, and make those positions very clear at the very beginning.
Yeah. Yeah. Certainly, yeah, it's going to be very interesting for that, for sure. I think it's going to be a fascinating, even if we don't know the decision, I think it's going to be a fascinating Tuesday anyway. And I think we're in for a very interesting ride. I mean, take comfort. We didn't know for 2 months who was going to be the government here in BC, so you guys will be fine. You'll be fine. Everything will just roll as is. The sun will go up. Everything will be fine. But that's going to do it for this one. We thank you guys so much for sticking around and doing this. And thanks, Robbie and Deidre, for coming on again. And we will talk to you. There will be something coming up on the election. I just don't know what it'll be. I haven't figured it out yet. So we'll talk to you.
We'll know more on Tuesday.
Yeah, we'll find out Tuesday. Yes.
Or Saturday.
Or the end of the month. Or the summer. We never know. Good luck to all of you. Thank you. Bye-bye.